Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with another Haydn Symphony Crusade. And we're all the way up to Symphony number 4 out of a total of 107. This one, I have a particular topic I want to talk about with respect to the Fourth Symphony. This is one of these delightful small works. Like most of Haydn's early symphonies, it's in 3 movements: fast, slow, fast-ish. This finale is a little bit unique. It's actually a minuet. And minuet finales are rare, but not entirely uncommon in Haydn's symphonies. They're quite popular in works of this period for finales of all types. You know, the classical process is that generally holds that the first movement of a major work should be the most complex. This has been true for like most of human history. I mean, if you think about, for example, Bach's overtures or the suites, there's usually a large sort of preludial thing. If it's a French overture, you know, it has a march and jerky rhythms, and then like a fugal contrapuntal middle section, and then a return to the marchy sort of thing. I mean, the most famous example of that is probably the first movement of Handel's music for the Royal Fireworks, you know, which is just the most majestic thing in the world. And it's got that really exciting middle bit, and then it returns to the march bit. And because of that, what happens later is that you get, I mean, in the Baroque period, you got a suite of dances in very simple forms that were generally short and unified by key, and there could be any kind of assortment that you wanted. In a symphony or a concerto in the classical period, you get a big, long first movement, and then a slow movement, and then possibly a dance movement of some kind, and then a finale. And the music becomes progressively more relaxed and easier. And in the classical period, the challenge, of course, is to sustain interest throughout the entire piece and not make the later movements sound like sort of appendices, like little tags or throwaway bits, because these works were supposed to have, theoretically, some sort of overall conceptual unity. And they didn't have that until Haydn got his hands on them, because that was Haydn's great achievement. And you can see that and hear it very, very clearly in Symphony number 4. And one of the reasons is, you know, one of the things that Haydn discovered was the power of reminiscence. And I don't mean literal quotation. I mean casual resemblance. Things that remind you of other things, that sound like other things. It's something that requires such sensitivity in terms of how you structure and build your themes, because it's enormously compelling when you listen to a piece and you just come away with it thinking, that's kind of related to that, or I've heard that before, but it's not exact. Because when Haydn was writing, he was working, as I say in these pieces, on a very small scale. Basically, this symphony is, 12, 13 minutes long. They're not long works in 3 movements, maybe 15 minutes, 16 minutes is pushing it. So what he doesn't need to repeat things quite as frequently as like later romantic works, where you bring back a whole tune, but you've waited half an hour before you last heard it. And so you can stand the breadth, you know what I mean? But in Haydn symphonies, he's dealing with small forms where things are happening in very close proximity to one another. So he doesn't want monotony, but on the other hand, he wants unity. And the best way to achieve that is through this idea of family resemblance. And you can see this very, very clearly. And I've actually prepared a visual aid in my own inimitable way, taking the incipits, which is like the first melodic line of each movement, off of IMSLP and marking it up a little. So I'm putting it up here so you can see it. And if you take a look at it, you'll see that the figure that I mark X, which is basically bump, ba-da-da-da-dump. I mean, that's what it is. It's this long note, then 5 quick notes. 4 quick notes leading to a final note, and 5 notes. So it's dum, ba-da-da-da-dum, like that. Every single movement in this symphony begins with that figure. Every single one. And it's not just that they start the same, because if that's all Haydn did, you'd never notice it. You probably wouldn't anyway, unless you were had an amazing memory for things like that. But Haydn then isolates that figure and repeats it over and over again. And in the first movement, you're going to see how he does it very clearly. And I'm going to mark it. See, I marked it X with an X. But then if you look at the slow movement, the Andante, it begins with this really long note. Yeah, da-da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da-dum. And that da-da-dum, that triplet is which I mark Y, so you can see it. Y is also going to become a little constituent molecule out of which larger structures will be built. And, the marvelous thing about Y is that it sounds like it's sort of related to X. Why? Because because it's just a descending scale. One has 5 notes, one has 3 notes. So every time you hear a little scalic figure that has 3 notes or 5 notes, they all sound like they're related to each other. But what that permits Haydn to do is to create completely original melodic material for every single movement, but they incorporate the same musical DNA. Therefore, you get this feeling of relatedness. And if you look at the theme of the minuet, the finale, you'll see that now, having just had, one X in the first movement, or a couple of them for the first theme, and then an X and a Y chromosome in the Andante, that the finale is built largely out of X's and Y's. And it is, in fact, even though it's a minuet, even though it's much more relaxed in feeling than the very energetic and developmental first movement, it actually incorporates and summarizes the constructive elements of the whole symphony. So it serves both purposes. It's both relaxed and easygoing, as a finale should be, but it's also formally one of the most sophisticated things in the whole symphony. And none of that you need to pay attention to in a specific way. You just get the feeling that all of this music, in spite of its range of expression, which is really wide, as you're going to hear, all of this music somehow belongs together. And that's what's so cool about it. And I found my quotation that I mentioned in talking about Symphony Number 3. It's in my book on Haydn, which I recommend very strongly. Exploring Haydn, if you can get your hands on it. I have it marked here with my let's see, what is this? My KN95 face mask, which also makes a superb bookmark when you're not running around for terror in the outside world. So, Haydn said to his biographer, this is his biographer, Griesinger. And Griesinger writes, Haydn always planned his compositions whole. His scores are neat and clearly notated and seldom contain corrections. Quote, "This is because I do not write until I feel certain of how the piece should go," unquote, he explained. And that is the word of power as a musical genius like Haydn was, who was trying to enlarge musical forms and create new forms and expand the language of music, and doing so in a way that always produced coherence, clear, lucid thought, which of course leads to clear, lucid emotional expression. Haydn is never muddled, ever. And he isn't in this Fourth Symphony. So with that said, I want to start to play you a little bit of it. We're going to hear the exposition of the first movement. And let's start. Now, as it plays, I've marked the moments where you hear X, some of the most obvious ones. It pops in a subtle way. And like I said, because the music is sort of constructed of it, you don't have to note every single instance where it pops up. You may think that there are more occasions than I actually mentioned. And you'd be right. I mean, it's all about how you hear it. And that's the genius of the whole thing. You just get this feeling that it's all very, very, very specifically put together out of distinct elements. And Haydn highlights the elements that you're supposed to notice. And so here is the exposition, which has, as most of these do, an opening theme and then motion music getting you to the second theme or second subject, which is a beautiful tune in a minor key, more graceful and lyrical. And it also contains X in a couple of notable spots, which I will indicate. And then the motion music returns to bring the exposition to the conclusion. So here it is, and again we have the Sinfonia Finlandia under Patrick Galois on Naxos. Did you hear how Haydn sneaks X in various spots so that you always notice it when it's there, but it's not so obvious that you think that he's being repetitious, because all of the melodies in which it appears are distinctive. And that's what's so great about it. Now, the second movement, this Andante, I have to play you the whole movement. It is so amazing. It is such a cool movement. It's for strings only. The two violin parts are muted. And I can't even begin to describe how cool it is. You have to listen to it. But the point I want to make is that formally it is sort of like a loose ABA, but it never really repeats. It has the opening idea, which I showed you, that ya da 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 da. That is kind of the only real thematic idea in the whole movement, and it comes back but always goes in a different direction. And so the piece sort of starts at point A and ends at point B. It's just incredibly nifty, because the accompaniment underneath is this perpetually syncopated rhythm. It's a chomp, 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 underneath with the violas and cellos, and the second violins are playing this syncopated line that it just creates this slithery, creepy texture. It's very shadowy. It's an entirely new world of expression, this movement. It really is. But it's a new world of expression that's realized in almost old-fashioned terms. This piece uses what you might call the Baroque single affect rule, which is that a movement should proceed in one tempo with one texture and express sort of one general sense of feeling or emotion. And this movement does all those things, but the emotion it expresses is so unusual and so unique that it sounds completely new. It's really incredible. So I just want to play you the whole movement and just listen to this. Oh, I have to add one thing. Well, I'll talk about it afterwards. Listen to the music first. stunning piece, isn't it? It's just so cool and slinky and shadowy, and like Mahler's Schattenhaft, the scherzo of his Seventh Symphony. I mean, you will not hear anything like this in another composer of the period. Mozart never did anything like that. Beethoven never did anything like it. I mean, this is Haydn trying to find new ways to use musical expression. It's incredible. But this performance, I have to say, is a locus classicus for why you don't need a harpsichord continuo. I don't know if you noticed it, but one of the things that sort of annoys me is that, there's no reason to have a keyboard part in here. Haydn didn't write one. It's completely unnecessary because the piece is harmonically complete just in and of itself with the string parts as they are. And every time the harpsichord comes in, I find it distracts from the actual mood that Haydn has established, because the rhythm is supposed to be steady and monotonous. The harpsichord has no dynamic range, so it's always the same volume. And if the dynamics are very soft and the harpsichord comes in and goes plink, it's jarring. And there's no part for it. So what does it have to add? Nothing. It doesn't do anything. It just distracts. And even when it's very, very sensitively done, and it is here, it really is, it's very lightly touched in. But then that just begs the question, why bother doing it at all? I mean, what regulates where it comes in and where it doesn't, and why, right? That's the conundrum that you have in adding continuo parts to these symphonies. And sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. And sometimes if you keep them quiet enough and low enough and in the background enough, you can get away with it. But you have an issue because the harpsichord, if the dynamic's very low, the harpsichord's the same volume it is no matter what. So that's something you should think about and make your own decision as to the aesthetics of it and whether you feel that's appropriate, because this is otherwise a beautiful performance, and it's a beautiful performance of that movement. But that harpsichord, that's how I feel about it. So, now we get to the finale. Now, the finale, as I showed you in my fabulous example, which I'll put up again so you can see it for a second, is built entirely out of X's and Y's. And because it's built entirely out of X's and Y's, it is the culmination of the whole symphony. But it's also a minuet. But it's not a typical minuet. It's a finale minuet. And Haydn, who was never one to just indulge in mindless repetition of anything, had his own finale minuet form. It's in sonata form. It's a movement in two halves, both repeated. It's a standard sonata movement. So instead of the minuet being the usual A-B-A, with the B being this middle trio section on different material, this is an extended A section. You have it is effectively an exposition, and then you have a development leading to a return, a recapitulation of the minuet, and so on to the end, and both halves are repeated. I'm only going to play you the exposition, but you can hear quite clearly that it's a highly developmental and forward-moving minuet. It doesn't just do the usual, dance steps and come to a quick conclusion so you can move on to something else. It's actually pretty extended, but it's extended in a wonderful way because you hear all those little X's and Y's as it's going, and all, like I said, even though it's using those same molecules to construct the themes, those themes are entirely unique to this movement. And that's what gives you that unity in diversity, which is the hallmark of the classical style, and which in these early symphonies, Haydn is working out for the very, very first time in the history of music. And that's the most exciting thing in the whole world. I'm telling you, it is. Well, I hope you agree with me, it is. So here is the exposition, the first half of the minuet finale. Okay, so once again, we hear that even in these supposedly early, supposedly immature, which they're not, these first symphonies, we see Haydn doing splendid, new, revolutionary things, but in a way which is entirely dedicated to entertaining and creating expression and enjoyment and expanding the language of music and bringing his audience in and taking his audience with him on this unbelievable musical journey that he's beginning. And you can only speculate how aware he was of what it was that he was doing. I mean, Haydn was absolutely one of the most musically aware people that ever lived. I'm serious. I mean, in terms of his position in the musical world and everyone else's with respect to his position, he was totally humble about it. But he knew. I mean, when he met Mozart, he met Mozart because he said Mozart was the greatest composer known to him, period. And he was right. And he knew it. And he knew it before anyone else knew it. And people probably thought he was crazy to say so. But, you time and time again with Haydn, you get this sense that he was just so aware of what the substance of music was and what could be done with it and what he could do with it. And I don't know, I'm just astonished, absolutely astonished every time I hear something by him, because that knowledge, that certainty of purpose stands behind every single note that he wrote. And it gives you such confidence when you listen to his music that you know you're getting the good stuff. There's no question about it. He knows what he's doing, as he does in this delightful, charming, wonderful Fourth Symphony with its fabulously crepuscular, one of my favorite words I've been using lately, crepuscular central Andante, a spooky little movement. Oh, it's just marvelous. All right, we're done with Symphony number 4. I could just blab on forever. I'm going to stop now. I'm looking forward to Symphony number 5. Thank you for joining me on the Haydn Symphony Crusade. Keep on listening, folks. Bye-bye.